Welcome to Desert Well, a place where we gather like travelers, finding refreshment and community around life's most essential source. Throughout history, wells have been places where people pause their journey, places where they share stories and find the sustenance they need to continue on. But we're here because we've discovered something even better. Jesus promised that whoever drinks from the water he gives will never thirst again. That living water doesn't just satisfy, it becomes a spring welling up to eternal life. So whether you're navigating the challenges of family life, wrestling with questions of faith, or simply trying to live faithfully in a complicated world, we invite you to pull up a chair around this well. Here, we'll explore how God's unchanging word speaks into our everyday experiences, offering wisdom, hope, and the kind of refreshment that truly lasts. This is Desert Well, where life's conversations meet living water.
Welcome back to the Desert Well, where we're always glad that you are here, both for the conversation that takes place and how you participate in that, but also for you to be with us as we drink deeply from the well that is Jesus. So happy Friday to you. Happy Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day of the week, whatever it is for you. We're just glad that you are here. Today, we are starting something new, something we've not yet done together, but we told you about it last week, where we are going to begin looking at a report every couple of weeks, once a month, that Derek and I found either helpful, interesting, something that we felt like we needed to share with you. And so it's going to be a little bit different than our normal format. We won't have as much necessarily free-flowing conversation about whatever thing we're going around and around on. But instead, we'll put this document in the description for you. So if you want to go and read it yourself, you can read it. But it'll be more of a, hey, let's scroll through here and through this report or whatever it is and talk about what we found interesting, talk about what we found challenging. How does it maybe apply to us? All of those sort of things. So we're excited for this, and hopefully you can learn along with us, and we'll sharpen each other as we think about, read through, digest something. So Derek, I'd be curious, this was your idea, if my memory's right. So what do you hope?
Your memory's probably better than mine right now.
At least I think it was your idea. Maybe I send it to you and you said, hey, we should talk about this on the podcast. But
that could be.
What would be your hope for people, for us, as we do this new thing together?
Just to have kind of a better understanding of the greater church in the United States and some of the trends and things that are going on. You know, we hear about things maybe in the background of whether churches are growing right now or, you know, over the past 20 years, churches are declining. Well, if that statement is true, one way or the other, it's helpful to have true data that points to these are the better trends within the greater church in the United States. And so just having that information is helpful, right? It can make us, one thing that we talk about in education all the time is making data informed decisions or data driven decisions. And so, you know, I live in data. I like numbers. That's what I like to tell people too. And having information to make decisions off of is much better than taking a handful of darts and throwing it against or to the wall and hoping that one of them sticks at on the bullseye of the target, right? So while all of this data, yes, is going to be helpful, right? It's the greater church, so it's not necessarily just LCMS specific, but it is helpful knowing what the general population is thinking, what they're feeling about, just about church in general.
So Derek has led us to what we're talking about today, which is a data-based report. So we're not really discussing an article about an idea, but instead a report from a group. So let's go ahead and intro it a little bit here. So we are reading as a staff our Tuesday morning meeting. Myself, Derek, Nicole, our assistant principal, Robin Davila, our preschool director, and then our two business people, and Pam sit around the table with John, our facilities guy, as well, every Tuesday, talk about what's going on, how we need to help each other, all those sort of things. And we are reading a book called Unstuck Church by Tony Morgan. And in that book, he goes through the 5 different phases of a church in the life cycle and what those churches are doing, what are the practices that they are known by, and what do they need to be thinking about. But that book comes out of an organization called the Unstuck Group.
Mm-hmm.
Their tagline is, "We help pastors lead unstuck churches." And so their primary thing is that they're a consultant agency that works with churches to help them get unstuck. A very simple idea. And one of the things they do, besides many other things, is they produce a quarterly report. And so they, I'm assuming, ask for information from other churches that they've either worked for or somehow have contact with. And they ask them a bunch of questions on a regular basis, and then they produce a document every quarter, every 4 months or so. I guess it'd be every 3 months. They produce a document, and then they share that with people. So the report that we're looking at today is from quarter 3 of 2025, was published on August 25th, 2025. So we'll timestamp that with this survey that they took in July. They had 250 churches who took this survey. The attendance ranged from 100 to 12,000 a weekend. And I think that's about all I'm going to intro it with. And so let's go ahead and just get started in it. So again, we'll put it in the description below for you to look at if you want to, quote unquote, follow along. We're not going to put it on the screen because Derek and I will walk through the numbers. We'll give those aloud for you if you're just listening to this audibly so that you're not confused. But if you want to look yourself, we'll put it down there. But let's go ahead and get started. Derek, I'll give you first go. What was something that you found or saw or read that was intriguing or that you think is worthy enough to say, hey, we should talk about this right now?
Yeah, the weekly attendance increasing. That was the big one, right? And this is what I was kind of leading to before was we hear things that attendance is going up, that specifically Gen Z is very interested in attending church and physically going to a church service, not just worshiping online or anything. And that is something that increased as well, and we can talk about that in a little bit too. But the in-person weekly attendance went up 11% from last year. 11% is not a small number. So I'm interested to see too what that trend continues to look like, as especially more Gen Z come into the age of making their own decisions and being out in the world themselves. And one thing that this report does not do is it doesn't go necessarily into the breakdown of the different generations. So when I'm talking about this, I'm bringing in other information, right, that I've heard or read to give some background with that too. But I would be interested to see what the difference in the generations in their attendance, because I do think that's important that we look at that and figure out why are people coming back to church.
Right.
I think that's a big question that we can ask across the board. And why is Gen Z coming back versus millennials might not be, and the boomer generation that they are staying strong with their church attendance or increasing. I don't know those data points, but I think it's helpful to know the different generations and why they're coming back so that we can reach those people too.
And again, this goes back to something else. I sent you an article from Barna Research Group yesterday that talked about how more men are coming back to church than women, and that women are actually declining in attendance compared to men, which is a very different thing. And so I think you said it really good that we need to be based in reality, because even just this past week, I was at a pastor's conference for our district, the Pacific Southwest District. And then again, I heard it when I came back too, that we tell stories, right? And our stories shape how we view the world. They shape how we think about things. And if those stories aren't based in the reality of where things are, then we're going to be living in a false reality, or that might be a little bit harsh, but we'll be living in a world that doesn't necessarily exist. And so if there is, for example, the general narrative, at least that I feel like is predominant right now in the church, is that nobody likes the church, all churches are in decline, It's hard to get anybody to come to church. It's sort of the woe is church, if you will, argument or mindset. And yet this Barna article, this data too, and then even more so too, we listen to Carey Nieuwhoff's podcast. He's done a few different conversations about revival in the United States, but even in the United Kingdom, in England, right? A very post-Christian world that men are coming back to church. And so again, we need to make sure our, call it, reality is tied with the true reality, or the story we're telling is matched with reality of the world, because then it will help us not just know what to do, but help us focus on, hey, what's happening and how might we be a part of whatever is going on in the world around us. One of the things I want to say about the attendance piece, because I certainly read this and that my first thought was, oh my goodness, because it says the average attendance of the people they surveyed was like, on average, these churches see 1,169 people. Okay. And so my first gut instinct is, well, then this is not meant for us, right? Because in the LCMS, the average worship is like 50 or something like that.
Yeah, it's 50 to 100 is usually your typical LCMS church. Yeah.
And so even I'll look it up, but even at the pastors conference, they told us about the percentage of people that have churches above, a certain number, and it was something like 75%. Let me see if I can find it. 75% of churches were 100 or less. Let's see here. I'll find it in a little bit. But anyway, at the end of the report, they break it down by size of like what church size it is. And here we go. So in the Pacific Southwest District, 73% of the churches are under 100 and 45% of them are under 50. So almost half of the churches on a weekly basis are less than 50 people. And there are only 34 congregations out of, I think, oh man, I should have wrote that number down too. 200? Is that right? 200 something? Only 34 congregations in our entire district that worship more than 200. So I would count us in that number. We've been worshiping above 200 for the last month and a half or so. Basically, once school has started, we've been pretty much right around that 210, 220 number. And so, again, I say all this because at the end of this, they summarize all of the questions by church size. And so they summarize it by less than 200, 200 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, and then above 2,000. And so even the less than 200 and the 200 to 500, both of them saw an increase of attendance. The less than 200 was an increase by 11, and the 200 to 500 was an increase by 17%. And so you think about it that way, like in our life together, a 10% increase of 200 is 20 people. And it's not massive, but it's a decent number if you think about, well, how many family groups is that? It's probably, at least if we're thinking just couples, that could be 10. But if you throw at least a couple families in there, we're talking that's an increase of anywhere between 5 to 10-ish family groups or household groups that have, chosen to begin to come here. And so I would say that I've seen that, but I'm also Johnny come lately or Johnny come newly, however you want to call it, that I've seen new people begin to attend here, even in my short time too.
Yeah. And I would just go back and say, 28 people might not seem like a lot, but then at the same time, when you get an additional 28 people in the sanctuary, you could feel the difference.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think, that we have also seen this level of attendance increase here too. Of course, we don't know the exact percentage that we've seen, but I think the general trend that we're seeing in the greater church is also true here, which again goes back to your kind of point with that segment there, was that when we see this 1,169 of average attendance, does this apply to us here? Well, we just answered it, right? Like we are seeing the same trends. So yes, this is applicable data to us as well.
Well, and it should at least cause us to ask, if we're not seeing that trend, then
Right. Then what are we doing?
what's going on, right? Like why are we not participating in the broader trends? And this is not, I think it's important to caveat that, though, by saying we are not to be chasing after shiny things, right? So there's a sense in which we don't need the silver bullet things. We don't need to pursue the next best thing, because we have the only thing everyone needs, which is the gospel of Jesus. But there is a sense in which it's a healthy thing to say, hey, if all the other Jesus people around me are growing in number, why am I not? What's going on that is prohibiting people? What is the barrier that is in place for people to be joining our family of faith? All those sort of things. It's not we're pursuing that, but we should at least be asking ourselves, hey, if everyone around us is growing massively and we're declining, that should raise at least a red flag.
Absolutely.
Maybe we would say at least a yellow flag, perhaps a red flag to us too, and say we got to do something, because either we're not meeting people's needs, we're not speaking to their desire, we're not, just like we talked about in our series, right? We're not meeting people with the gospel of Jesus in a way that they need to be met with. And that's an issue, because what we want is for all people to believe in him, come to faith in him.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think it's a positive for sure that churches are seeing growth, that they're seeing people come into their worship service weekly. I don't know if this report goes into the average, like what is considered to be a full time regular attender, right? And how that plays into this too. That would be some interesting data as well, to see if people are coming back regularly, like every week, or if it's regular as like what my father-in-law was talking about
Once a month.
few episodes back. Yep, once a month. It is regular, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to see that trend too. And I don't know, maybe they'll show some data on that, or maybe we'll find a different report on that too. But yeah, I think it's all positive things. And like you said, if we also weren't seeing these things, then it should cause us to raise, I would say, more of a red flag than not. But then on the other side, if we are seeing far greater than 11% growth,
Mm.
right? I think that we should also reflect and say, okay, well, what are we doing that is causing the greater than the national average in growth right now? And how can we lean into that too? And how can we continue to invite more people and bring them into our church so that we can teach them about Jesus? I think that is the ultimate goal, right? Is that, yes, attendance is a number, but really we want people there so that we can teach them about Jesus.
It's not the end all be all. You will never hear me say that's the most important number at all.
Right.
But it still is an important number to at least have if people are not here, then we can't do the things we want to do for them with them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I know that the report gets into this later about tracking new visitors and things. So we'll talk about that in a little bit too, which I think is interesting. I think that's something that we've seen a difference in also. Let's go to the online service views, because I think this is kind of important for us here too. So online service views went up 22%. 22%. So double the in-person average weekly attendance. Now, our generation of millennials and the younger generation of Gen Z, we use the internet as a window shopping device. So the very first thing that we do is we go to a website to learn more about the organization or the product before we ever buy it. And so it's not the like physical building aspect that you walk by, but we are going to the internet, to social media, to websites so that we can learn more about people, which I think is one reason why this increase is seen so much too. And I don't know, we've talked about it before, but there's like an average number of online views that somebody has before they typically physically come to a service. Wasn't it like 4 times, I think?
I don't remember having that conversation. So maybe that was part of you and Becca, our communications person, attended a branding thing a couple weeks ago. Maybe that was part of that. I don't remember how many
It might have
times.
been a different podcast that I was listening to also. Sure. Who knows?
But yeah, the general point is right that just because you see something once doesn't mean you're going to come. And
Right.
so you have to be exposed to over and over again the content, the place, if you will, to say, hey, maybe I'm going to come check it out. And Amy Anderson, who is the new CEO, director of Unstuck Church group, said that it's encouraging to see online views trending up again. We know from both research and our work with churches that online views are a lead indicator for growth. The fastest growing churches constantly have strong online engagement. So what that means is that the more online growth you have is usually a precursor or a first step for then in-person growth. And so this is why you will always hear me say, my time doing this podcast with Derek, the money we pay Becca, our communications person, and the presence we have on the intranet online is worth our time, because it is not just the front door, but it's, like she says, the leading indicator. It's how people get connected to us before they decide to come in and actually see it in person. And so it's always worth our time, always worth our thing, not our money in that way. But we could always talk about, hey, how do we do this best? And that's where I think we always need to be trying to improve and trying to get better. Anything else about online stuff?
Well, I would just say with this, I think our numbers are going to be a little bit conflated, right? Or inflated, I guess you could say, simply because we've been very intentional about this over the last 3-4 months. Having somebody that's dedicated to our social media accounts, all of our online presence stuff, going through and editing this podcast for us so that we can get the content to people digitally. So shout out to Becca for taking the time to do that and helping us with that. So yeah, I would say that our numbers are probably greater than 22% versus where we were at last year, which is a good thing, right? Sure. According to what you just read, online presence, having a strong online presence is a very good thing. So
one of the things that I struggled with, and I told you this a little bit beforehand, it is the general sense in which I read this and thought, well, I guess we need to become a big, giant, non-denominational church that only offers contemporary worship and has a jam and youth group
rock concert every Sunday.
And so, but let me tell you a few things that made me feel that. So, one, they're talking sort of executively on page 4. Worship style is shifting. Yep. So they said more than 3/4 of churches, 76% that they surveyed, now only offer modern or contemporary worship services. Research shows that churches in decline are more likely to offer multiple worship styles. Think traditional, blended, and modern all under one roof. The more styles a church offers, the more likely it is to be losing ground. And that's a really hard one. It's one of those, you can't tell me, because you ask any LCMS church that has moved to and or begun a contemporary worship service, that they did not all of a sudden, the gates of hell did not suddenly like bow before them and say, oh wow, now there's 1.5 million people here. It just doesn't work like that. And yet at the same time, you scroll down to page 12 where they break it up by churches, and you look at the scale from a church of 200 to a scale of a church of 2,000, and who's offering only modern contemporary versus offering other ones. It only goes up the further you go down that scale. Well, I guess it doesn't. At 500 to 1,000, it goes down a little bit. But largely speaking, it goes from 58% of churches less than 200 do more than one option. And then at 2,000, it's 92% of those churches. So you could say, well, it's a trend. But hey, that means even a church of above 2,000, there's 8% of those churches, who knows how many that is, that do offer something that is blended or is not just contemporary. And so I think for those people who hear that say, oh my gosh, are you going to kill the traditional worship service? I'm not going to do that. It's a very important part of our life together. But I think what it does show, and what they talk about, whether it's this or a podcast I listened to from Unstuck, that if we know the people we're trying to reach prefer one style versus another, then it's not that we kill or get rid of a worship service per se, but that when we talk about marketing our worship services, we focus on marketing the one that people are more apt to come to. And so that's how you sort of live in this tension of, hey, this or that. Well, we're the contemporary worship wars are done. Those are over with. That was a long time ago, and we're past that. But we could say, hey, in our context here in Las Vegas, people aren't necessarily looking for this, or the ones that we're trying to reach aren't looking for this. They're looking for this thing instead. And so we're not going to get rid of this, but we're not going to push it like it's the main option. Instead, we'll do this thing over here and say, hey, you're new to us. Come to this service, come to this, be with us in this way, all those sort of things. So anything you want to add there when you think about worship style and what they say about that?
Yeah, it was also intriguing reading that, because we want to meet people where they're at and offer something that they want to come to, so that we can get them the message, right, that is Jesus. And that data shows the opposite of it, right? That offering just one option is seemingly to get better results in getting people to attend. But I also think that there's some context missing with that would be somewhat interesting to dive into. Like, these are the big 2,000 plus churches, right? That they do have the rock concert, a lot of them. But I will say too that there are very good biblical based non-denominational mega churches that they're doing something that is drawing people in with their contemporary service. And so I think that there are some things that we can learn from that too. But yeah, I would say, no, we don't need to be worried about the traditional service going away. That is something that is part of the LCMS, and it will be part of the LCMS, I think, forever. The divine service going straight from the LSB. It's one thing that you can count on with Lutheran churches is no matter where you are, that there's going to be a traditional service of some sort. And yeah, I'm one of the weird ones that I really enjoy both.
Sure.
I enjoy a good traditional service, but I also enjoy a good contemporary service too.
But at the same time, I'll speak out of the other side of my mouth. Nowhere in the scriptures does it say we must worship with page 5 and 15 or with divine service setting 1. And so at the same time, if we are to say this must be something, then I think we're on the cusp of being married to our methods and not our mission, right? And so our mission is for the sake of Jesus, for the people, to be teaching about worship this weekend in our new member class, as well as communion. And worship is about two things. First, primarily to receive from God, and then second, to respond. But that's a very small second. Right? Worship is primarily receiving from God, and we receive forgiveness, we receive his word, we receive the sacrament in worship. It's to receive first from God and then to respond in thanks and praise and offering, all those sort of things. And so that's the why. Now, how you do that is going to look different in the United States versus in Africa versus in, pick your point on the map. And so maybe I can also say, let's not be married to what we do in any way. That if there is a day in which we need to have a hard conversation about something, what motivates us is not the methods we've done, but the mission and the reason we're here. And so you could use very specific, hey, we're here to help people learn, live, and love through Jesus, like Jesus. And if you tell me this is no longer doing that, then we need to have a really hard conversation on both sides, right? If our contemporary service is not doing that, we need to have a conversation. If our traditional service is not doing that, we need to have a conversation too about that. Because I love what Craig Rochelle says too, that we will do anything short of sin to reach people for the gospel of Jesus. And then I would add, to equip them to live their life of faith. And that's that's an easier thing to say than to do. right? It's an easier thing to talk about than to actually live it out. But again, I think it's the realization that we need to be focused solely on what we're here to do. And if that's not working, then we can't. I mean, we can say this is what we're going to do. It doesn't matter if it works or not. But then I will tell you which way that leads, and it's not up, right? We are married to methods. Being married to methods is not a sign of health, right? That's a sign of decline. That's a sign of unhealth. We haven't done a made up word in a while. So
Yeah, for like
dishealth.
the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, right. So a sign of unhealth is the closest thing I can think of for a made up word. But we have to also, it's both things, right? So we can say, hey, just because this data says this doesn't mean that we're going to get rid of one worship style or the other. But at the same time, in all things, we have to say, hey, is this really getting done what we want it to do and what we believe it should do? And if not, then we need to ask, well, is it too long? What's the problem that's happening that is preventing people from attending, from being a part of something?
Yeah, and I think that goes for anything that we're doing, right? And I'm not just talking church-wise, I'm talking any aspect of our life. We need to be willing to look at what we're doing, and if the outcome is not what we want, then we need to look at the method of what we did and change it if we didn't get the expected outcome. We
Right.
talk about it all the time in our staff meetings. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity,
Insanity.
right? So we have to be willing to have those conversations, to sit down and say, we should be willing to take a little bit of a risk in anything that we're doing so that we can get a different result or a different outcome. I'm a big believer, and I tell the teachers this too, try something. If you want to try teaching a lesson in a different way, go for it. Because if it doesn't work, guess what? You can always go back and do it the way that you did it before.
Right.
So let's try new things. Let's see if there are different and better ways of doing things than what we're doing. And I think that's a bigger discussion as a bigger church body that you and we know is somewhat being had, and hopefully that conversation continues. I want to go down to now the ministry connection, because I think this is super important.
Okay.
So on page 6 here, where it's talking about the small groups that are being offered, right? 65% of churches only offer home groups rather than groups that meet in the building. But then Sunday school and midweek classes are becoming less common. I think part of that is more cultural than necessarily something that the church is doing itself. That there's just less time that people are devoting to outside of worship because their schedules are busy. We kind of talked about this before too, about
Sure.
things that take people away from
Mhm.
that. But yeah, Sunday school and midweek classes are becoming less common.
And this is a great time to talk about future church too. So we would think, hey, that's bad, right? Oh, that means less people are in the word. That means less people are gathering together with their family of faith, all those sort of things. But let me reframe it perhaps in a different way for you. So if the only option for you to connect with people is in your home where you live, how many of your neighbors don't go to church? How many of them don't know who Jesus is, or maybe know who he is but don't really trust in him? And how many of those people are going to come to a Bible study we have here on campus versus if you would invite them to come to your home instead? And so Future Church talks about, again, this is the book we're reading with our board of directors, recommended it in that 5 books every Christian should read. And it talks about how when we focus solely on the church as the programming hub of your life, then what it does is it pulls you out of your neighborhood every single night when you're gone for this Bible study, for that Bible study. And what it does is it means you're not engaging with your neighbors then in that time, and they don't even know where you're going perhaps. But should we say, hey, we actually don't want you to come here. We want you to go and do this in your home, in your community, and to invite your friends and your neighbors over. And whether you study the Bible for the whole time or you play a game or whatever it is that you do, you play cards, whatever. But the likelihood of you doing, again, why are we here? To help people learn, live, and love through Jesus. And the likelihood of you engaging someone who doesn't yet do that on a Sunday morning or whatever day we have our Bible studies, we have a whole bunch of them, versus if you were to do it at home, you're much more likely, I think, on that second one when you're at home to engage someone in that way too. And so this is like a frame shifting sort of thing to think about. Because again, on one hand, you could say, what? Are you saying I don't need to be in the Word? No, absolutely. You need to be in the Word. Yeah. You will only grow in your faith. You will only hear the voice of Jesus if you spend time in the Word. But I'm saying the goal and what ways you could be involved with other people become differently focused if that's what we're trying to do, or how we accomplish that will become different if that's what we're truly trying to do, instead of just thinking about, well, I need to find a group of friends and I need to grow in my faith. What if you saw yourself, like we've talked about, that you have a story we're sharing, that you've been redeemed to tell, that Jesus wants to use you with the people you're already in relationship with? How would that help you see this as maybe we should think about starting a Bible study in our Aliante neighborhood instead of starting a new fill in the blank here at Lamb of God?
Yeah, and I would say that's where the church, the building and the people, and our responsibility is to teach people how to go out and do that, right? Or at least give them as you said before, equip them to go out and do that. But here's the other side of it. So I'll do the same thing. I'll say one thing and I'll go back and argue against it. We also, you don't need that to happen either. You don't need the church to be the one to tell you to go and do something or equip you. And this is one reason why I say it. Beck and I, when we first moved out here, we were invited to partake in an in-home group Bible study that was offered just to us because we were new to the area. And so we did that for the better part of a year and we loved it. We had so much fun with it. We learned so much. We were the youngest couple that was in that group at the time. And it was very helpful for us when we were new here to Las Vegas. Newly married. I mean, we were 23, 24 years old at this point in time.
Sure.
Far away from family, you name it, we needed help. And so, I think that those people still to this day, that they invited us to that. But then afterwards, when that one kind of dissolved, right, naturally, Beck and I, we kind of talked and we're like, maybe we should do this on our own. Maybe we should invite some of our friends and just get together once a month, twice a month, and let's pick a book to go through. Let's pick a book in the Bible to go through. Let's read through Ephesians. Let's watch some videos on Ephesians. And I think that we saw, I was saying Beck and I in this, that we saw our faith and our knowledge and our love grow in that time more so than not. And I think that it goes back to the way that the early church worked. Right? They met in homes and they sat around and they talked with each other, went through scripture together in their homes. And so I like that visual of it, that when you're getting together with people within your community and inviting them into your home, sharing a meal together is one of the best things I think that you can ever do. Share a meal, have a Bible study. And that's what we used to do. We would all bring up a dish and we'd eat. And then afterwards we'd sit down and we'd go through the study at whatever point that was.
And you think about it's not just what the early church did. You could even, I think, make the claim that it's how God created us. I mean, go back to the Garden of Eden. What did he say about Adam? It's not good that man is alone.
Yep.
And that's before the fall. And so we could say we were created for relationship, I just started, I don't know if I'll ever finish it, but I listened to a little bit of David Brooks's new book on my way to the pastor's conference that's about seeing people, like truly seeing them. And I would say that he's making an argument that people are created to be seen and known. And so whether it's big churches, they have to accomplish that goal just as much as small churches do. And so whether you're a church of 2,000 and plus on a weekend, they have these small groups because they know people will not be seen or feel seen in a giant worship service like that where there's whoever knows how many people. But here we could say, well, I mean, people tell me all the time, I feel seen here. People know me. They come up to me. They say hello to me. We do the sharing of the piece. And every week I have to say, all right, we need to get going. Otherwise, we're going to go for an hour and 15 minutes, people, because people are seen and known.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, I think some people would say, hey, we need to make sure we don't grow too big so we don't become that. Well, again, method versus mission. I'm sorry, I want as many people to hear about Jesus as possible. We can accomplish being seen and known in different ways. And so it's more about, well, in this setting, we don't necessarily feel that need to have those home groups, although I would say that would be a wonderful thing if we all started meeting together on a regular basis, whether it's here for Bible study or not. But we feel seen in a different way. And this is how other churches largely accomplish that goal of being seen and known.
Yeah, and I'll go back to this data point here on the being involved in a group. Or the report says 46% of adults and students are plugged into a group. And so there is an increase in that also from last year, which I think is huge, right? There is basically what I got from this report for the most part, from top to bottom, is that people are hungry for the gospel. People are hungry for community. People are hungry for knowing that they are loved and cared for by the people that are around them, but not only that, but by their Lord and Savior too. And so I think the report as a whole was very positive in that regard too. Can I move us on to the next one?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the other one that I saw was cool is right below it, right? The volunteer engagement is up. So 37. Now this is a little bit, I want to know, it says 37% of attendees are serving in some way. So do these churches that have 2,000 people, do they have 740 people serving? What?
That's a lot of servants.
Well,
But
and what level is it? Are they considering
right.
serving as leading a small group? Right? Is that considered to be serving? Or is this like helping out with the worship service in some sort of way, or serving the community, right? Going out and being the, I don't know, you name it.
They
Right?
serve
So
sometime.
yeah. So that was very interesting. Like seeing that the people are engaged not only in small groups, but they're also engaged in serving others.
Sure.
In some way, shape, or form, whatever that might look like, depending on what the metrics were that they were looking at here.
So say more. Why is it interesting to you? Is it higher than you thought? Is it lower than you thought? What about it is unique?
Well, I would say 37%. That's pretty high, I would think, in terms of the number of people that are volunteering. But that might be a lot of people like in the background too that you never see, that you don't notice. And I'm not saying that we're not trying to notice you or not notice people serving, but there are a lot of people that do like to serve in the background. And so I wonder if that's part of this too. Because I think about here, well, in serving, well, we can serve as an usher, you can serve as a greeter, you can serve on a few different committees, right? We might be at that level too. I don't know if we went through and counted up all the
what's 30% of 200? 37% of 200 would be 60, 74?
60 something people.
If you count like fellowship teams, we
I
might
guarantee
be a little bit
that's
closer
what this
than you
is
think.
talking about.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And so I think the thing that I want to take your point and raise, you want to go down the next page, because I think it's a relative or related thing. And so in the next section, they talk about staffing. And I think this is directly correlated with volunteer engagement. And the reason being, so they say the average church has one full-time equivalent staff member for every 56 people in worship. That includes all ministry and support staff. And so for us, according to that, it would be, we have 200, we should have 4 full-time equivalent staff people. which in some ways we do. And the most tricky part is this doesn't take into account that we have a school of basically 300 kids attached to our organization
Correct.
as well. And so I don't know how that changes these sort of things, but I would say, so she has a quote here that, again, I'm just going to read it because it's really good. So she writes, Amy does, there's a big difference in staffing between churches over 2,000 in attendance and everyone else. The bigger the church, the leaner the staff. I'll read that again. The bigger the church, the leaner the staff. Churches with 2,000 plus in attendance have one full-time equivalent for every 87 people, while others average one for every 48. The myth that big churches grow because they have more staff doesn't hold up. I'll read that again. The myth that big churches grow because they have more staff doesn't hold up. Larger churches are usually better at developing volunteers and leaders, and they hire staff who know how to equip others. That strategic focus is a big part of their growth story. And so I would say, hey, people have asked me, when are we going to get a second pastor? Or when are we going to get a DCE? Or when are we going to fill in the blank, hire someone else? And my answer is usually not now and perhaps never until we become much larger, because what I believe my role here, and I think is playing out, is to be more of a, hey, let me help you do what you're doing. Let me help you equip you. Let me help you walk alongside, what sort of leadership development pipeline, program, volunteer thing do we need? Because this is how you get people involved. It's, I would say, a sign of health that people have ownership over the ministry of this place, that they view themselves as being the ones that participate and partake in it. And I think we could say here, hey, actually, this idea that we need to hire more people so then we get more people doesn't bear itself out. That's what they say anyway. So it's hey, you want more people? Then, well, you need to be involved. We need you. We need you to participate. We need you to be a part of this. It's moving from consumer to being a participant in, right? That we come on Sunday or Saturday night to get my hour, to get my whatever, and then I'm done. And we need to move from that to, hey, I'm an active part of what is happening in this place because I believe in this place and what it's doing. So I found this incredibly, it's what I thought bigger churches had more staff people, and I thought they were the ones that had like crazy amounts of staff. You look at Faith, right? In our community, they have a whole bunch of people, but I don't know what their total sort of number is per person, but
would have no idea.
I would assume it's somewhat close to this. So
this makes me think of like the big mega churches that have the big cameras, the stage, the lights. It's like, are all those camera people and the light and sound people, are they just volunteers? Do they only have like one or two people maybe that are actually paid on staff? It's like, how are they training these people to do that?
Right.
That would be
well, and maybe your pool is larger, so you get more people that have more refined skills, if you will. So then you don't have to like train them how to like do a camera. Well, hey, I am a cameraman. Can I like help you out? It's that sort of thing. But still, just the general idea that bigger churches have less people hired full-time equivalent than smaller churches, to me, is somewhat revolutionary. Is too big, but at least surprising in how I don't think we typically think in that way. And yet at the same time, when you play it out, you do the sort of logic, you say, oh, that kind of makes sense. Like we should be involved more. We should get more people on board, because in my experience too, speaking from my last call, we were a very staff run church, and that's fine as long as the people are just as engaged. But when the people aren't as engaged, and I just talked to the congregational president yesterday, did like an exit interview with him and told him this very same thing, that when the people aren't engaged, then, the natural response comes, hey, we want an Easter egg hunt. Well, the pastor can do it. We want this social event. Well, the pastor can do it. And it's not that's bad, right? It's fine. But I would say to you, are they doing the most important thing that they could be doing with their time, the highest impact for the present and the future? And in some ways, I would say, and I hope you would agree, that that's not necessarily the most highest impact thing that they could be doing. Whereas somebody else that maybe has same organizational skills and abilities, someone who's waiting to be plugged in could do just as good, if not perhaps even better, than a pastor might too. So it's less of a pastor's lazy and more of a, hey, we want to involve as many people as we can to make them all a part of this thing that we're doing here.
Yeah, and I think that you are absolutely correct that I think that the previous trend or previous kind of thinking was that if we build it, they will come. If we staff it, they will come.
Right.
That's no longer true. That we do need to be careful about what we're doing staffing wise and focus more on building the leaders from within too. You want to go on to the next part, the ministry
Should we
finances?
talk about money? Yeah. So
Let's talk about money.
I think the thing that I found most intriguing here, and some of it makes sense. So I'm going to skip page 8 and go to page 9. So they did this in partnership with a company called Mortarstone. This is from their annual report from 2024. So it's a little dated in that sense. But the thing, they give 4 different statistics, and I almost think every single one of them is very important. So this is where I don't know where we are in this thing. I don't know what the history has been at Lamb of God for the pastor to know or not know about the general giving trends. I mean, I see the same thing that you do in the bulletin, and I get my monthly finance reports. I know how much income we're getting, but other than that, I don't know who gives what or what even our biggest giving account is. So I thought a lot about that, and I'm sure that will probably change. But nevertheless, in here they list 4 things. First, only 1 in 20 church attendees tithe. They said that's about 5%. And so I'm assuming they're working with the definition of tithing as 10%.
Or do you think that they just mean
giving regularly? Who knows? So a little bit ambiguous on exactly what they mean by that. But regardless, if only 1 in 20 people of our church give in general, then that makes total sense of the next thing they say is that the top 1% of givers account for 21% of total giving. This is the 80-20%, right? 80% of the people, or 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Well, actually 1% of the givers do 20% of the work. And that I'm sure probably bears itself out here too. But then this one is very important, I think, for thinking about generationally, what you said earlier.
Yep.
Replacing the giving of just one boomer would take 3.5 millennials or 10 Gen Z givers. So one boomer would take 3.5 millennials or 10 Gen Zers. I mean, you hear about, because I live in the Bitcoin world, I hear a lot about stuff like this, that this is the greatest wealth transfer from generation to generation that has ever taken place. And so it makes sense that the boomer generation, who has the most resources available to them, would need a much more of those sequential generations to replace that giving. Now, we could have interesting conversations, I think, about like what does that mean when that transition is like taken place? I would assume then, if there is anything of an inheritance for these millennials from a boomer generation, that maybe that number would actually go down then, but nevertheless still an important thing. Because what you say then, hey, once boomers go to be with the Lord Jesus, assuming that they aren't, well, I mean, I hope some people are thinking about the church in their sort of legacy giving, right? That we can tithe and make a statement of faith even as we die and what we leave behind, that then your ministry is going to need to pick up 3.5 more millennials to replace that one boomer who's with the Lord now. And that's I think for some people would be very scary. But at what you just said too, that Gen Z is coming back to the church. And so if we see a rise in attendance, if we see a rise in participation, it's not just attendance, participating with the church, then maybe that will sort of make up for itself. And then lastly, and then I'll ask you your opinion, Derek. So the last thing they say is inflation since 2019 has totaled 28%. Again, because I live in the real world that is Bitcoin, there's people that think it's been much higher than that, and that, all these reported numbers are all fabricated, et cetera, et cetera. Regardless, they say that's erased much of the growth in giving, even when dollar amounts go up. And so what this would say is, that's great. Your church has gained 24% in giving. Well, actually, you've gone down by 4% because inflation has been 28% or more. And so it's one of those, what's your metric that you're tracking against, right?
Mhm.
And so if it's just the dollar value or amount, then sure, it could look great. But I think it's a reality that all of us experience, and maybe we've just become used to it. But it's that, hey, my dollar doesn't buy as much as it feels like it used to 5-6 years ago, right? That everything cost more. My dollar is worth less. And the same is true for churches. And so even if our giving is up, and God help us if our giving isn't up 28%, then we're down even more so. Because then we're less than keeping up with the rate of inflation itself. So I think some very insightful numbers, some very, call it maybe humbling numbers to think about too. But I think things that would help us, or say, hey, if we're helping people follow Jesus, the greatest lie we could tell ourselves is that Jesus didn't talk about money. In fact, that's one of the things he talked most about. And it's the greatest idol of all people, like we've also said a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
And so it helps us say, hey, this is a need for discipleship, a need for helping people grow in following Jesus as they think about how do they spend, give, all those sort of things. So what are your thoughts as you hear those four statistics, four things?
You and I, we were talking about something not related this morning, and that was of the general trend of that conversation too, right? Is that our generation of millennials, where we are today, we just don't have as much income or equity, or however you want to call it. We don't have as much giving power as the generations before us. Let's put it
We
that
don't
way.
have a bazooka. How's that?
And it's even more true for the younger generation as they're coming out of college, just entering the workforce, right? They're just trying to get their feet under them. So we can't expect that they are going, even if they give 10% and they tithe regularly, it's going to be a lot smaller portion of the overall giving, just because they're not at the point in their careers where they're making a ton of money. And again, this is a huge generalization, right? There are people who do not follow these trends, and I will make that disclaimer. So I would say that one was not the most like surprising, but it was also very interesting to see an actual physical number attached to the sentiment. Again, going back to what I said at the beginning, data is good to have because it can tell you what trends are actually taking place and at what level and at what extent they're taking place.
And I think too, the data, I will say this too, that data is only so good as we tell people what to think and feel about
Yep.
it, right? That it should always move us in a particular direction to a particular thing.
Yep. And then I think the last thing here, I'm going to not necessarily talk about those four things.
Sure, that's fine.
But this struck out to me that younger generations care about the impact taking place inside the brick and mortar rather than the actual brick and mortar, where that is a generational shift. But again, it goes back to what you and we just talked about, I don't know, 30 minutes ago in this podcast, that our generations, the younger generations, we go to the online presence first before we ever make a decision to buy something, to go somewhere, whatever we're investigating. We are doing our homework before we do anything. We want to know, what is the impact that this place is having on the greater community? What is this impact having on people's lives before I'm ever going to step in your door or give to your organization? And so I think that's important to understand too, that where our thought processes are and just the reason why we give is different, which I think is also important to understand. Again, going back to generations and understanding why the generations do what they do.
Right. I think last thing, this will be my last thing, and then I'll toss it to you for last observation. I know we're at an hour already. So again, these are fun, I think, because they help us have conversations about things that we don't necessarily normally have. And so one last thing, they say that churches owe 0.7 times their annual giving. So basically that's how much debt they have. They say we encourage churches to keep debt below twice their annual giving, But interesting, in these words, interesting, our research shows that plateaued and declining churches are more likely to be debt-free than growing churches. I think that's a strange sentence. We'll just say it that way. And that our church body that has largely hook, line, and sinker bought Dave Ramsey and every single thing he says as gospel could maybe think about that line, that they supposedly see those who are debt-free are plateaued or declining, and that perhaps having debt is not a sin, or is not something that we should avoid like the plague. And now, obviously, you have to add caveats like you can pay it, it's not unreasonable. There
Yeah.
are some caveats there. But I think as an organization, to say, we never do this and we can't do it and we need to get rid of it with all that we have because it's bad and etc. I would say, well, it allows us to perhaps grow and allows us perhaps to do new things, to reach new people, to do the ministry that happens inside the brick and mortar, and gives us the capability to do things that we maybe couldn't do before. And so
And so
I'm
that we
not
can impact more people too, right? And that's how you
yeah.
get the both. That's how these churches, I think, are getting both, or the broader generations to buy into their mission and what they're doing. So
Right.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. No, it's perfect. So play that out. So, for example, we've shared with our voters that we are in contact. We signed an initial little agreement with the interior designer for the sanctuary, but for a big, Derek wants a gym. We all know Derek wants a gym.
I would love a lot of things. I've got big plans over here. I would love a lot of things.
Let's take the example of a gym, right? So some people are going to like, hey, this is a beautiful space, right? We just want this thing. But we could also say, well, think about the things that could happen inside of this gym now. We can have productions that take place where every family can be together. We can host meals for large groups of people. We could have a night together where we bring all of our families and we talk about what does it mean to raise kids in the faith. And it's not that we couldn't do that in the sanctuary, but we can do it better in a gym where there's round tables, there's a place for food that's not on our carpet. We can have, and maybe we welcome other organizations into our space to use that facility, and then that becomes a relationship building point for those in our community. I mean, that's the sort of difference between, isn't this a nice building, to think of all the ways that this building could impact us into the future and how we could use it to grow and to do new things as an organization. So that's all I've got, Derek. What's your last thing that you found helpful, interesting from this report?
I'm just going to go back and I'm going to say overall, the report was very positive. It was very uplifting to see some physical numbers attached to what we've been hearing about in not just our community, not just our city, not just our denomination or our Pacific Southwest district, but that good things are happening within the church, and it's good to see. We don't need to see these numbers to know that Jesus is on the move and that Jesus is doing really awesome, cool things for his people, right? And that more people are coming to know him. The Holy Spirit can do things without us, of course, but it is very interesting and very positive to see that what people are doing out there is having a big impact for the greater church.
As you said a couple weeks ago, science does not reveal things to us. It merely just reveals the ways in which God made things already. And so God is already at work. This just merely maybe reveals a few ways in which he already is at work that we can talk about and have a basis point for a discussion in. So did you hate this? Did you like this? Let us know if you're still here.
Is there a report that you want us to talk about? Send it to us and we'll look at it and see if it's
maybe
something
say no, maybe say yes. Again, we're trying to do things that you might find interesting, valuable, all those sort of things. So thanks for being with us this week as we gather around the well that is Jesus to see how he's at work, we'll say it that way, and what that might mean for us as followers of Jesus here in this time, in this place. We'll see you next week.